Hey everybody, it's Dan here from The Plague. Welcome to another episode of Hidden Gems. This is the show where we take a look at some albums from history of heavy metal, hard rock, and we try to pick out some albums that maybe were a little underrated, flew under the radar, that we think deserve a little more attention. So joining me as usual, Nels.
Hello.
And I think, do you want to start off this week?
Sure. Yeah. This week I have no visual aids because I couldn't find. I guess I have this on CD somewhere, but I don't know where. Yeah, that's the one. I couldn't believe I didn't have. The only thing I have on LP is like a greatest hits Nazareth.
Really?
Strangely, I mean that's like I never buy greatest hits albums.
Right.
You just think I would have several, at least 3 that I can name Nazareth albums. No, so I wanted to do Nazareth this time. And honestly, it's a bit of a strange, it's a strange band to approach because for me, it's like many Nazareth albums have like 3 or 4 what I consider to be great hard rock songs on them. And the rest of them just aren't to my taste. Usually they're not as heavy. In fact, they have some very, very light sounding rock contrast, which is, it's cool. It's good that they had such variety. But it also meant that it was kind of difficult for me to go, that one Nazareth album is the one. So I just kind of picked one, but know that there's like several that Nazareth albums that are very similar to this for me. And I picked 1977's Expect No Mercy, which is their 9th studio album, and to me really has some of the heavy songs that really epitomize when Nazareth, for me, played to my taste, which is obviously the heavier and more hard rock stuff. And yeah, like I said, there's several albums that fall into this whole into that same category for me. I didn't really want to pick Hair of the Dog just because that's kind of the one that everybody talks about, I guess. And I know that there's been, there was that Guns N' Roses cover of Hair of the Dog.
Oh, yeah.
Probably brought them to the attention of a different audience. But yeah, there's that album. There's No Mean City. That's a great album. That album really plays the part of a early 80s heavy metal cover. It really looks like it should be.
Absolutely.
Yeah, which is interesting because, even on the cover of Expect No Mercy, it has that great Frazetta cover. It doesn't really I don't know. To me, that says this is going to be a hard rock heavy metal album. And really the album's like 50-50, I would say. Mm-hmm. But it has some incredible standout tracks. And most notably to me, Dan McCafferty's vocals. He has a fairly incredible range, actually. And when he sings like kind of that grating sort of rough sound, and it's on their more hard rock songs, like Revenge is Sweet, or Kentucky Fried Blues, or the title track Expect No Mercy. To me, that just works really well. Like it's kind of like that prototypical heavy metal that was, coming out around a little bit earlier than this. It's very much hard rock as well. Kind of bridges that gap. But he had a really unique voice. Still does, as I learned recently. Yeah, for the longest time, I thought that he had sadly passed away, and I was very relieved to discover that he has not. But also the guitar playing on here, Manny Carlton, their original guitar player, really a talented hard rock guitar player, and just rock in general. Even the songs of theirs that are not necessarily to my taste as far as the style, they're very competent rock playing throughout on all the instruments, in fact. But yeah, Manny Carlton definitely stood out. So that's my sort of my cop out as far as saying this is a hidden gem. I think Nazareth in general maybe doesn't get as much of a attention from the hard rock scene, because they do have like at least 50% of their catalog is not what I would consider to be hard rock, and certainly not metal. But yeah, that's my take on Nazareth, and in particular Expect No Mercy, which it's interesting. They're one of those bands that even if there's only a couple songs on the album that you actually are drawn to initially, if you sit down and listen to that album all the way through, eventually the other songs will start growing on you as well.
It's true. It's absolutely true. Because I remember when I was younger and first getting into Nazareth, I think Loud and Proud was the only album I actually owned, and my brother had all the other ones. So I would just make tapes of all my favorite songs from those and listen to those. But then when, as I got older and actually bought the albums, it was kind of like discovering all these new songs that I wasn't aware of. And
yeah, it's one of the I think drawbacks of the modern music delivery systems, in that they've more or less done away with the whole concept of an album. You used to buy an album, and especially if you got it on tape, or if you were lazy, you put it in and you're going to listen to it all the way through because you have no choice.
Right.
I mean, unless you want to sit there and fast forward through particular songs, or make a mixtape or whatever, you end up listening to songs that you maybe would not otherwise have, and sometimes they would grow on you, and sometimes they become like your favorite songs, and I think that was a real bonus of having songs in album format that we kind of miss out on.
Yeah. You mentioned Dan McCafferty's vocals, and yeah, I think he is such an underrated vocalist. Like, I think back to like 1977, and like,
yeah,
there was really nobody doing singing like this. Like with
I know,
it's a really gritty, raspy voice, but also like he could like turn around and do a ballad, and it was just like
incredible range.
Yeah,
the guy was just amazing.
And like his delivery on Kentucky Fried Blues, oh my God, there's just a couple lines in there that are just so like drawn out, and like, yeah, it's just perfect.
Yeah, the riff on that song too, just to this day when I hear that, I'm like, oh yeah.
Yeah, there's definitely some like proto metal a feel to some of the riffs on this album.
Absolutely.
And it's interesting to think, like, what if they had just leaned into that at this point, like where their career could have gone. Like they could have really just kind of been like one of the pioneers of the whole heavy metal scene, really. But they were just like, I think their interests were just so diverse. Like they really loved like blues and country, and they just wanted to play everything. And so it kind of limited their overall popularity, but it made for some really interesting albums.
Yeah, I kind of find myself thinking, oh man, I wish they had done more of this or more of that. And then but I also kind of think, well, hey, they got to do whatever they wanted for, a career's worth of music. That's pretty awesome. I can't really begrudge them doing what they wanted. But yeah, the variety is fairly extreme sometimes. And it would have been awesome to see, in an alternate universe.
Yeah.
What kind of albums they would have made if they had just really leaned into that.
I think having Manny as their producer for most of their career, actually, I think helped a lot too, because they could just kind of like do what they wanted, and
that's a good point.
Not have to, be beholden to whatever the producer of the day was.
Right. Yeah, they definitely had some hits along the way for sure. And of course they put out many albums. I mean, so many albums. I'm not even honestly familiar with quite a number of them. I should probably look back into their catalog at some point. But yeah, Manny Carlton, definitely super good guitar player, really competent producer. And I'm sure that was a big bonus to them.
Yeah, his guitar playing is also like just, I think, super underrated. Like
it really is
so many different styles, and it always is like perfectly suited to like whatever the song is that they're playing.
Yeah, absolutely. He's pretty impressive. I think there's a lot of kind of hard rock guitar players that maybe don't get as much credit as as they deserve. There's some amazing players in that scene. They maybe aren't as flashy or as solo oriented or whatever as some other guitar players, but there's some really awesome players in that genre.
Yeah. Yeah, Dave Meniketti from Y&T comes to mind. He's like always been like just incredible, but you never hear him mentioned,
Right.
People
Yeah.
like all-time great guitarists.
Yep.
I don't know if you saw this when you were doing the research, but they actually recorded this entire album and then the record label rejected it.
Yeah, I saw that too. And I guess there's a 30th anniversary version or whatever that has that. I don't have that, and I have not heard those versions. It's kind of interesting.
Yeah, I actually have that, and it's kind of good that it got rejected. I think because it's like a couple of the songs, like "Expect No Mercy" and one of the other ones that's really good on the album. I think "Give Me What's Mine" were not on the original album.
That's interesting.
And just the takes on that album are like just weird. Like I mean, it's probably just weird because I've heard the other version so many times. But
Sure, yeah.
Especially "Gone Dead Train," their cover of that is like his vocal delivery is like really flat on the original one, whereas like the way he sings the one on the final release is like it's really good. I mean, it's just,
yeah. That's another one of those songs that the more I listen to it, the more it's catchy and it's well done. Yeah, it's really interesting. I wonder what that whole process was like of because clearly here's some record label telling them to go back and do more work, right? Which I guess they're paying for, I would imagine.
right.
But who knows? I wonder what that whole thing was like, how that all worked. And clearly they did like a lot of work at that point. They didn't just kind of like remix it and send it back, right? It's very different. It was interesting reading through their long form history, how their career kind of had a real like curve to it, and after a while, it sounded like their albums weren't even getting like major releases. That must have been kind of an interesting time for the band. I don't get a real sense of like how mainstream and popular the band was, other than like Hair of the Dog, obviously. That's a very breakthrough, especially the song itself. But I don't get a real sense for like how mainstream they were, and then how big of a fall that was for them.
Right. Yeah, I think the one time I saw them was in '92. So I mean, they continued touring like throughout their even like at the lowest of the lows.
Right.
And they were still really good, live. But yeah, I mean, they're playing in Springfield at the Mill Camp. So
yeah, exactly.
It's got to be a little discouraging after playing in arenas,
Yeah, you always wonder about that. And obviously the people that keep doing it are doing it because they love it. And,
Yeah.
And I guess, I mean, they're technically still a band right now.
Yeah. Yeah.
Pete Agnew. Yeah.
Keeping it going.
Yep. Which more power to him.
Yeah, exactly. All right. Well, I am going to talk about an album from 10 years after that album, 1987. And my choice for this week is a pretty obscure one, actually.
Yes.
From Texas, of all places, TYTON, Mind Over Metal. For some reason, I thought they were from LA, probably just because their label was. And even back in the day, like there wasn't a whole lot of information about this band. Like they kind of came out of nowhere. They were on Medusa Records, which I think was like a subsidiary of Restless. Yeah.
I think that's right.
It was like the metal sub-label of Restless Records. But yeah, so, okay, here's what I found out there. They were a 5-piece. They were from Houston, Texas. Started in '84. This was their second album. They had an album before this called Castle Donington, which I've actually heard, and it's not that great. It almost sounds more like a demo. Like,
interesting. Wow.
Yeah, the songwriting and just the recording are just kind of subpar. But Yeah, they were a real anomaly because they came out in '87 at like kind of the height of the thrash metal scene, and even death metal was starting to come around, and they were just like a total throwback at that point. Like they were playing very like classic heavy metal, very medieval fantasy sort of lyrics, and I don't even remember what inspired me to buy this album, honestly, because the album cover, if you look at it, it's like, yeah, okay.
Yeah, it's kind of halfway between stock footage and like real cheesy, like, oh, let's put these props up here.
Exactly. Maybe I just saw a review in a magazine or something, but yeah, it's one of those albums that I liked it at the time. And just over the years, like I just kind of go back to it every so often, and I still enjoy it. And it's like some of the songs will even like just kind of pop into my head randomly. It's just one of those albums. Like they I don't know, they just wrote some catchy, cool songs. Stylistically, it's got like a kind of a Ren Fair medieval vibe to it, and like some of the songs have that kind of 3/4 time signature, and they include some like the glockenspiel on one song, and it's I could see where people, especially at the time, were like, okay, this is really cheesy, but I don't know, there's just something about it that I find charming. The opening of the album is like a perfect example. It's called Fanfare, and it's just like this very like 80s sounding keyboard. It's almost like the opening of a fantasy role-playing game on some computer game at the time, and it's got timpanis and a big gong at the end and everything. But it leads into the first song, which is The Warrior, and it's that's just like a great heavy metal song to me. It's got like a nice progression of riffs. It's got a really like heavy, kind of cool chorus. And yeah, like I feel like the album is actually pretty solid, and there weren't a whole lot of bands doing this at the time. I mean, there was like you had bands like Liege Lord and Omen who were still kind of exploring, the kind of classic heavy metal with, the more fantasy sort of themes. But yeah, it seemed like a lot of bands had moved off into more like, talking about real subjects, and
right,
which is cool too. I mean, at the time I was totally into both of them. So
it's interesting to me because I don't remember that album from back in the day. Like it wasn't on my radar at all. So I don't have all the context to it that you do when I listen to it now. And it definitely sounds like a very mid to late 80s semi-underground album as far as the production quality and the producing on it and the recording. But it's still like really awesome. Like you said, I don't have that context of, hey, there aren't very many people doing it at that moment and any of that, but it's still like really awesome, very specific genre of metal from that time. It's kind of like this time capsule.
Yeah.
You often pick ones that I'm like, oh God, either A, I don't remember it at all, or B, I'm like, oh, I haven't listened to that in a long time. And so I get to go back and listen to these. And yeah, I really enjoyed listening to this one. It just felt like a very, a piece of its time brought forward. And they really only did like those two albums, it seems like.
Yeah. They recorded a demo in '91, like a 3-song demo that was actually pretty good. You can find it on, the songs on YouTube. But again, it was like very similar to this, just like slightly better production. And so in '91, it was like even more out of place.
Right.
So I kind of understand why no one signed them at that point. But the production you mentioned, it is very like 1987 production. The producer was Ron Gowdy, who I was looking at his credits. I don't know if you looked at it at all, but he did Mojo Nixon and Skid Roper. He did some of their like classic albums.
Well, there you go.
Striper.
Oh God. Okay.
Wrath. He did one of the Wrath albums.
Really? Okay.
And then the classic Guar album, Scum Dogs of the Universe. So yeah,
Wow,
a
that's
pretty diverse
surprising.
career, this guy.
Is there a common line? Like, were they all on some offshoot of the same record label, or
That's very possible. Now that you say that, actually, because I can't remember what label Stryper was on, but I could definitely see it
yeah,
being like on Restless or something.
right? Like maybe he was sort of a house
That's a
producer.
go-to guy, yeah.
That's interesting. Yeah, that's quite the variety.
Um, this is also one of when I sold off all my vinyl in like the year 2000. This is one of the only records that I actually kept.
It kept it. Wow.
And it's not because I liked it more than some of the other ones. It's because it's like, okay, I don't have this on CD. I don't think it's ever going to be on CD. I better hold on to this.
Yeah.
And I don't think it's ever gotten an official release. There is a CD version out there that's got both albums on one, but I don't know how official that is.
That's right.
Um,
Straight from the Russian Federation.
yeah, probably. But this the vinyl from back in the day and the cassettes you can still find pretty cheap. Like it's because it was never an album that like people were like, oh my god, I have to have this. It's like some rare Metallica thing, but
Right.
it's just like an interesting piece of history that I think a lot of people missed.
Right.
And you know, any fans of like the U.S. power metal from that time, like the bands I mentioned, you know, Warlord, Omen, Leech Lord, Brocus Helm, any of those bands, I think you dig it. I mean, the vocals are maybe a little acquired taste. Like he's a good singer, but it's definitely not for everyone, probably.
Right.
But when Hammerfall first came out in '97, which seems like an eternity after this album, even though it was only 10 years.
Only 10 years.
This is the album that they reminded me of the most. Like it was like, okay, here's somebody going back and doing 80s metal with
right.
kind of the medieval themes and stuff. And so, yeah, I think any Hammerfall fans out there, I think would probably be advised to check this out as well.
I think that's one of the obviously really amazing things about the music scenes today is like these like subgenres or trends or whatever. They used to be so narrow, and it's like, you know, people would do like that style of heavy metal and sort of the medieval themes, and then that would become old hat, and it would be like, okay, now everybody's moved on.
Yeah,
it's like, well, now all of those things are completely alive all the time. There's so many people out there into any various sub genre that they can go really deep, and those genres just live forever. And there's constantly new bands coming out in that exact genre. It's very cool.
Yeah, that's a good point. That's one of the things I think about when people complain about like music nowadays. Like, oh, back in the day it was so much better. It's like, well, not really in a lot of ways.
Yeah, and so much easier to find anything and everything, of course. There's so much more of a stage for any genre of music to be heard and found and appreciated.
Yeah.
But it's true, you know, the old days were better.
Yeah. Back when the record labels forced them to get out there and record two albums a year. And
yeah. Or told them that, no, this album isn't good enough. You have to resubmit it.
Cool. Yeah. Any other thoughts on either Nazareth or Titan?
You know, listening to both these albums just makes me realize that there's tons of stuff that I either missed or have forgotten about, or, you know, need to go back and look into more. You know, just looking at with Nazareth, you know, even though I hunt and pick like the songs that I like from their catalog, they have a huge catalog.
Yeah.
Probably most of which I actually have not heard, to be honest.
When they did that, those remasters like 10 years ago or whatever, I actually bought all of those because they had a lot of bonus tracks. Like,
oh, holy cow,
hadn't been released, or like B-sides that weren't on the albums.
Right.
And
how many was that?
Man, it was kind of everything up through the early 90s. So,
okay.
Yeah, I don't know how many albums that is, but quite a few, because they were pretty consistent. Even in the 80s, did an album every couple of years. So,
Right.
And even at their very worst, I could always find at least one or two songs on those albums that I like. And usually it was just kind of like, okay, they're kind of catering to the production of the day. That's why I didn't like it.
Right.
But anyways, so yeah, that's a good point about like, just not having the time to go back and kind of explore some of these bands and catalogs. So I'm sure there's a lot of stuff out there still that like neither one of us have ever heard that
Oh yeah,
we would love. So anyone out there watching this has some bands that, you know, you want to suggest that we check out, please leave us some comments. Any kind of like classic hard rock, heavy metal, thrash, whatever. Yeah.
It would be really cool to, find hidden gems that are, that we discover. Like everything that I've reviewed so far is something that I remember back from when it came out or very close to that. But yeah, it would be interesting to do hidden gems of things that we've discovered that we had no idea about.
Yeah, that could be an interesting variation on the hidden gems theme. We could just try to do some research into albums that, I mean, it's nice to have like that history to talk about, like, this is how I discovered the band. This is how they were treated back in the day. But I have to think about doing that. Cool. Well, thanks for watching, everybody. If you have any comments, like I said, please leave them below and give us a like and subscribe. And we'll try to do another one of these next month. Till then, stay metal.
All right.